Rachel had always been the type of person who saw the world differently. To her, every person who walked through the doors of McDonald's had a story, a reason for being there at that particular moment in time. While most of her colleagues focused solely on getting through the shift, handing out orders and counting the hours until they could go home, Rachel looked deeper. She loved interacting with the customers, especially the regulars who came in every day. She knew their names, their usual orders, and sometimes, if they shared enough, a little about their lives. It was a particularly chilly afternoon, the kind of day where the wind cuts through your jacket, making you wish for the warmth of home. The restaurant was quieter than usual, with only a few customers scattered across the tables, most of them absorbed in their meals or scrolling through their phones. Rachel stood behind the counter, wiping down the surface and occasionally glancing at the door. That's when she saw him. The old man shuffled in, moving slowly as if each step was a great effort. His clothes were worn and frayed at the edges, his coat too thin for the biting cold outside. His gray hair was unkempt, and his hands, pale and weathered, shook slightly as he pushed open the door. Rachel's heart ached just looking at him. He reminded her of her own grandfather, who had passed away a few years back. She had always been close to him, and seeing this elderly man now struggling alone stirred something deep within her. The man walked up to the counter, his eyes scanning the brightly lit menu overhead. Rachel could tell he was trying to make sense of it, but his expression was one of confusion and hesitation. When he reached the front, she greeted him with her usual warmth. "Hi there, sir. What can I get for you today?" she asked, offering him her brightest smile. The old man looked down, fumbling with the pocket of his coat. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely audible, soft and shaky. "Just a burger, and maybe a coffee," he said, his words slow, as though he was choosing each one carefully. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of coins, placing them on the counter with trembling hands. Rachel watched as he tried to count out the change, his fingers clumsy and unsure. It didn't take long for her to realize that he didn't have enough. The total came to $4.75, but the coins he had only added up to about $2. Rachel could see the embarrassment on his face as he realized it too. His eyes darted up to meet hers and then quickly dropped to the counter again as if he was too ashamed to look at her. "I'm sorry," the man mumbled, his voice cracking. "I thought I had more." Rachel's heart sank. She knew McDonald's had strict policies about not giving away free food, and the managers were always watching. But she couldn't stand the thought of this man leaving empty-handed, especially when he clearly needed the meal. Without a second thought, she reached into her own pocket, pulling out a $5 bill. She glanced over her shoulder to make sure her manager wasn't watching, then quickly handed the money to the cashier next to her to cover the cost. "It's okay," she whispered to the man. "This one's on me." The old man's eyes widened in surprise. For a moment it looked like he might refuse, but then his expression softened, and tears welled up in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't know how much this means to me." Rachel smiled and waved it off. "It's no problem at all," she said, handing him the receipt. "Your burger will be out in just a minute." As the man walked away to find a seat, Rachel couldn't help but feel a warmth spread through her. It wasn't about the money. It was about doing something that felt right. The old man reminded her of something her grandfather used to say: "Always help someone when you can. You never know when you might need the same kindness." She hadn't thought about those words in a while, but today they rang true. However, her small act of kindness didn't go unnoticed. From across the restaurant, Lisa, the store manager, had been watching the whole exchange. Lisa had been at McDonald's for nearly a decade. To her, the rules were everything. She ran a tight ship, believing that if even the smallest rule was broken, it would lead to chaos. In her eyes, policies were there for a reason, and they were not meant to be bent or broken, no matter the circumstances. As Rachel went about her work, oblivious to the fact that her manager had seen what she'd done, Lisa's expression darkened. She couldn't let this slide. To her, it wasn't just about a few dollars. It was about setting a precedent, about making sure everyone followed the rules to the letter. Employees giving away food, even with good intentions, was unacceptable in her eyes. She had already dealt with incidents like this before, and in every case, she had to enforce the rules strictly. When the lunch rush finally slowed down, Lisa called Rachel into her office. Rachel's heart sank as she stepped through the door, seeing Lisa's serious expression. She had a sinking feeling that this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "Rachel, we need to talk," Lisa said, her tone flat and stern. She sat behind her desk, arms crossed, her sharp gaze fixed on the young woman. Rachel tried to remain calm, but her stomach churned with anxiety. She had been working at this McDonald's for almost a year and had never been called in for something serious before. "Is everything okay?" she asked, already suspecting the answer. "I saw what you did earlier," Lisa began. "You paid for that old man's food out of your own pocket." Rachel nodded slowly. "Yeah, he didn't have enough money and I just wanted to help. It was only a few dollars and I didn't think it would be a big deal." Lisa's expression didn't soften. "That's exactly the problem, Rachel. It is a big deal. We have policies for a reason. You can't just give away food even if you're paying for it. It sets a bad example for the rest of the staff. If everyone started doing that, it would get out of control." Rachel blinked, taken aback by the harshness of her words. "I understand there are rules, but he looked like he really needed it. I didn't think it would be wrong to help him." Lisa's gaze hardened. "It's not about what you think is right or wrong. It's about following company policies. And unfortunately, Rachel, this isn't the first time I've had to deal with something like this. We can't have employees making their own decisions about who gets food for free. I'm afraid I have no choice but to terminate your employment." Rachel's mouth fell open in shock. Feared? For helping someone? It felt surreal, like she was in the middle of some bad dream. She had never been in trouble at work before, and now she was losing her job over something she thought was an act of kindness. "Please," Rachel began, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean to break any rules. I was just trying to help. It won't happen again." But Lisa shook her head, her expression unyielding. "I'm sorry, Rachel. You've been a good worker, but this is non-negotiable. You can collect your things and leave." Rachel stood there for a moment, stunned and speechless. Her hands trembled as she realized what had just happened. She had never imagined that doing something good could cost her her job. With tears stinging her eyes, she nodded, unable to find the words to argue further. She turned and walked out of the office, her heart heavy with disappointment and disbelief. As she gathered her belongings, the restaurant suddenly felt cold and unfamiliar. The warmth and kindness she had tried to spread, seemingly erased by the rigidness of the rules she had unknowingly broken. The old man's grateful face lingered in her mind as she stepped out into the cold air. But now it was accompanied by a bitter sense of injustice. Rachel sat on a worn park bench, staring at the empty pavement in front of her. The cold wind tugged at her hair, but she didn't bother to fix it. Her mind was too overwhelmed to care about the chill creeping into her bones or the people passing by, oblivious to her presence. The events of the day played over and over in her head like a loop she couldn't escape from. Being called into Lisa's office, the look of disappointment and authority on her manager's face, and finally the words that had shattered her. "You're fired." The sting of those words felt unreal even now. How had things gone so wrong so quickly? It had all started with a simple act of kindness. She hadn't thought about the consequences when she reached into her wallet to pay for the old man's meal. It seemed like the right thing to do. Yet in the space of a few hours, that decision had flipped her world upside down. Fired. Gone was the small paycheck that helped her with college expenses, the job that had kept her afloat while juggling the demands of school. What was she going to do now? Rachel pulled her coat tighter around her, her mind racing. She couldn't tell her parents about this, at least not yet. They would only worry, and she hated the thought of adding to their burden. They were already struggling with medical bills from her father's recent surgery. No, she had to figure something out on her own. Maybe she could find another job quickly, but in this economy, nothing was guaranteed. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her from her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw a text from her best friend, Kelly, asking if she wanted to meet up for coffee later. Rachel sighed. She hadn't even told Kelly what had happened. She wasn't ready to face anyone yet. Just as she was about to put her phone away, she noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. Someone was walking toward her, slowly but purposefully. At first, she didn't pay much attention, assuming it was just another passerby. But then as the figure came closer, she realized it was the old man she had helped earlier at McDonald's. For a moment, Rachel felt a rush of warmth at seeing him again. Maybe it was the universe's way of reassuring her that what she had done was worth it. But then confusion set in. Why was he here? And more importantly, how had he found her? The old man, his coat still looking as threadbare as it had earlier, approached her with a smile that seemed softer now, more knowing. His eyes, though aged, sparkled with a kind of kindness she hadn't noticed before. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a taller man, maybe in his 40s, well-dressed in a crisp jacket and polished shoes. His posture was confident, and there was a sense of quiet authority about him. The two men stopped in front of her, and the old man gestured toward her with a slight nod, as if introducing her to the stranger. "Rachel, right?" the younger man asked, his voice warm and pleasant. Rachel blinked, unsure of how to respond at first. "Yes, I'm Rachel," she answered, her voice cautious but polite. The man smiled, extending his hand. "My name is Jonathan Martin. This is my father, Robert. He told me about what you did for him today." Rachel's eyes darted from Jonathan to Robert, the old man who had been so quiet in the restaurant earlier, now standing before her with a gentle smile. "Oh, it wasn't a big deal," Rachel said, feeling a bit embarrassed. "I just wanted to help." Jonathan's smile widened as though he had heard this kind of humility before. "That's exactly why we're here," he said, his voice holding a note of admiration. "You helped him without expecting anything in return. My father isn't just an ordinary customer. He does this from time to time, visiting different restaurants and places, seeing how people are treated when they think no one's watching." Rachel's brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand. What do you mean?" Jonathan chuckled softly. "Let me explain. My family owns several high-end restaurants in the city, and my father, Robert, used to run them. Now that he's retired, he likes to go out and experience the world through the eyes of our customers. He doesn't do it for any reason other than to see who still treats people with kindness, no matter the circumstances. Today, you showed him something rare: compassion." Rachel felt her cheeks warm, and she suddenly found herself at a loss for words. She hadn't known any of this, hadn't even imagined it. To her, Robert had been just another person in need, another human being who deserved a little kindness, and now, to learn that there was more to the story, left her reeling. "You're probably wondering why we're telling you all of this," Jonathan continued, his tone growing more serious. "When my father told me what happened and how you paid for his meal, it struck a chord with me. We don't often come across people who are willing to help others without expecting anything in return. It's exactly the kind of attitude we encourage in our company, and frankly, we could use someone like you in our organization." Rachel blinked, her mind struggling to process what he was saying. "Wait. Are you offering me a job?" Jonathan nodded. "Yes. I'd like to offer you a position at one of our restaurants. We pay well, better than what you were making at McDonald's, and we value the kind of heart you have. You showed my father respect and care when you didn't have to, and that's something we prize in our employees." Rachel's heart raced. Just hours earlier, she had been fired from her job, devastated and uncertain of her future. Now, out of nowhere, she was being offered a new opportunity, a better one from the sound of it. Her mind whirled with questions, but she couldn't deny the surge of hope that began to fill her chest. I don't know what to say," she stammered, still trying to wrap her head around the situation. Jonathan smiled. "You don't have to say anything right now. Take some time to think about it. We can meet tomorrow and discuss the details, but I think you'd be a perfect fit for our team." Rachel hesitated for a moment, still in disbelief, but then nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll think about it. Thank you." As the two men left, Rachel sat there in stunned silence, the weight of the day's events pressing down on her. Only now, that weight felt lighter. In the span of just a few hours, her world had turned upside down, but not in the way she had feared. Instead, fate had handed her a second chance, an opportunity that might just change her life. The next day, Rachel met with Jonathan at one of his restaurants, a sleek, upscale establishment that was worlds apart from the fast food joint she had been working at. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, the kind of place where the staff greeted you with genuine smiles and the food was carefully crafted with care. It didn't take long for Rachel to realize that this was the kind of environment where she could thrive, where kindness was valued, not punished. Jonathan explained the role they had in mind for her, a position that paid nearly double what she had been making at McDonald's. But more than the money, It was the philosophy behind the restaurant that drew Rachel in. Jonathan emphasized how much they encouraged their employees to go the extra mile for their customers, to treat every person who walked through the door with respect and care, regardless of their background or appearance. It was everything Rachel had wanted in a workplace, a place where her values aligned with the company's. By the end of the meeting, Rachel had accepted the offer. As she walked out of the restaurant, her heart felt lighter than it had in days. What had begun as one of the worst days of her life had turned into a moment of new beginnings. The small act of kindness she had shown Robert had led her to an unexpected opportunity, one that promised a future far brighter than the one she had left behind. In the days that followed, Rachel threw herself into her new job with enthusiasm and dedication. She quickly adapted to the fast-paced environment, and her natural ability to connect with people shone through in her interactions with customers and colleagues alike. It wasn't long before she began to make a name for herself, not just as a hard-working employee, but as someone who genuinely cared about the people she served. As weeks turned into months, Rachel's reputation grew within the company. Jonathan, impressed by her work ethic and her continued kindness, began to mentor her personally, helping her develop new skills and take on more responsibilities. Before long, she found herself in a leadership position, overseeing a team of her own. But throughout it all, Rachel never forgot the lesson she had learned that fateful day. She made sure to pass on the same message of kindness to her team, encouraging them to help others whenever they could, even in small ways. The memory of the old man in the McDonald's and the ripple effect that one small act of kindness had created stayed with her always. It was a reminder that sometimes when life knocks you down, it's because something better is waiting just around the corner. As Rachel settled into her new role at Jonathan's restaurant, her life began to take on a new rhythm, one that was filled with purpose and fulfillment. The contrast between her old job at McDonald's and her current position was stark. Here, the work environment was infused with a sense of mutual respect and understanding. Every shift felt like an opportunity to not only excel in her duties, but also to make genuine connections with people, from her co-workers to the customers who walked through the door. The restaurant was part of a small chain that prided itself on delivering not just high-quality food, but also an exceptional dining experience. Jonathan, who had taken over the operations from his father, Robert, believed that kindness and generosity were integral to running a successful business. He was a firm believer that customers weren't just paying for food. They were paying for a sense of care and belonging. This ethos trickled down to every employee, and Rachel quickly found herself thriving in this atmosphere. It didn't take long for her to make an impression. Within weeks, customers were asking for her by name, charmed by her genuine warmth and her willingness to go the extra mile. When a customer had a bad day, Rachel would notice. If someone seemed out of sorts, she made sure to offer an extra smile, a few words of encouragement, or even a complimentary dessert. These small gestures, which came so naturally to her, did not go unnoticed by her co-workers or her bosses. Word began to spread within the company about Rachel's impact. Jonathan, who had initially hired her for her heart, quickly realized that she was more than just a kind employee. She had a knack for leadership. Rachel had a way of inspiring those around her to care more, to do more. Her co-workers admired her, and many followed her example, embracing the culture of kindness that she championed. About 3 months into her new job, Jonathan pulled her aside after a busy dinner service. "Rachel," he said, smiling warmly as they stood near the entrance of the restaurant, "I've been hearing a lot of good things about you from both the staff and the customers. You've been doing an amazing job here." Rachel felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you, Jonathan. I really love working here. It's been a great experience so far." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad to hear that, but I think you're ready for more. We're planning to open a new location downtown in a few months, and I want you to be part of the leadership team. You've got a natural ability to connect with people, and that's something we need in our managers." Rachel blinked, momentarily stunned by the offer. She had only been with the company for a short time, and now she was being considered for a leadership role. The weight of what Jonathan was saying began to sink in, and she felt a swell of pride and disbelief. Just a few months ago, she had been working at McDonald's, fired for a small act of kindness. Now, she was being given the opportunity to lead. "I don't know what to say," Rachel stammered. "I would love that. I just never imagined I'd be considered for something like this so soon." Jonathan's smile widened. "It's well-deserved, Rachel. You've proven yourself time and time again, not just in how you treat customers, but in the way you inspire the rest of the staff. I think you have the potential to go even further in this company." As the conversation ended, Rachel walked home that night feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Her career was taking off in a way she had never imagined, and it all stemmed from that one moment of compassion for an old man in need. The trajectory of her life had changed, and she couldn't help but marvel at how everything had unfolded. Meanwhile, as Rachel's star rose, the fallout from her firing at McDonald's began to take on a life of its own. A few days after she had been let go, a regular customer who had witnessed the incident posted about it on social media. The post detailed how Rachel had paid for the old man's meal and how, instead of being recognized for her kindness, she had been fired. At first it didn't gain much traction, but soon people began sharing the story, expressing their outrage at the way Rachel had been treated. The post went viral, with thousands of people commenting on how unfair it was that someone could lose their job for an act of kindness. The backlash against the local McDonald's was swift. Customers began boycotting the location, leaving negative reviews online and demanding that the manager, Lisa, be held accountable for what had happened. Before long, the media caught wind of the story. Local news outlets ran pieces about Rachel's firing, with headlines like, "McDonald's employee fired for helping elderly man," and "Act of kindness costs worker her job." The public outcry grew louder, with people all over the country expressing their disgust at the way Rachel had been treated. Lisa, the manager who had fired Rachel, found herself at the center of the storm. She had always been strict and by the book, but now her rigid adherence to company policy was being called into question. Customers began to avoid the restaurant, and the once busy location became noticeably quieter. Corporate McDonald's, eager to protect their brand, started investigating the incident and Lisa's handling of it. Eventually, after weeks of negative publicity and declining sales, Lisa was called in for a meeting with higher-ups. The investigation led to Lisa's dismissal. Her decision to fire Rachel had been deemed too harsh, and her unwillingness to consider the larger picture had cost the company not only a good employee, but also its reputation. The irony wasn't lost on Rachel when she heard the news. The manager who had fired her for showing compassion was now facing the consequences of her lack of it. It wasn't a moment of triumph for Rachel. She wasn't one to wish harm on anyone, but it did feel like a strange sort of justice had been served. As the dust settled from the McDonald's controversy, Rachel's story became something of a symbol in the locale community. People rallied around her, not just because of what had happened, but because her journey had proven that kindness could indeed change lives. Her rise from being fired to being offered a leadership position in a respected restaurant chain inspired many. Rachel herself remained humble about the whole thing. She hadn't set out to make headlines, she had just wanted to help someone in need. The fact that it had all spiraled into something bigger was something she hadn't anticipated. Months passed, and Rachel grew into her new role as part of the leadership team at Jonathan's restaurant chain. She continued to live by the values that had gotten her there: kindness, empathy, and a willingness to go above and beyond for others. As she moved up in the company, she made it a point to encourage those around her to adopt the same mindset. She introduced a new policy in the restaurant she oversaw. Employees were encouraged to show compassion, even if that meant covering a meal for someone who was struggling. The policy wasn't about giving away free food on a whim. It was about recognizing that sometimes a small act of kindness could make all the difference in someone's day. Rachel knew this firsthand. Her leadership style quickly became a model for others within the company. Employees loved working under her because she treated them with respect and fairness, and she never forgot the importance of the human element in the business. Customers, too, began to notice the difference in the restaurants she managed. They felt more welcomed, more appreciated, and Rachel, for her part, found deep fulfillment in knowing that she had helped create that kind of environment. But more than just the professional success, Rachel's journey became a story that resonated with people on a larger scale. Local schools invited her to speak to students about the importance of kindness and standing up for what you believe in. Her story was featured in newspapers and on blogs, inspiring people from all walks of life. The message was simple but powerful. Even the smallest act of kindness could ripple outward in ways you could never imagine. As time passed, Rachel remained grounded in the values that had led her to where she was. She never forgot the day she had been fired for buying a burger for an old man. In fact, she often thought back to it as a reminder of how unpredictable life could be, and how important it was to hold on to kindness, no matter the circumstances. Looking back on her journey, Rachel realized that everything had unfolded in ways she never could have predicted. What had seemed like a moment of despair had turned into an opportunity beyond her wildest dreams. In the end, she had found not only professional success but also a deeper understanding of how much power a single act of compassion could hold. Rachel's legacy at Jonathan's restaurant chain continued to grow, and she became known not just for her leadership, but for the values she stood for. And in her heart, she knew that no matter what challenges the future might bring, she would always live by the lessons she had learned. When in doubt, choose kindness and the rest will follow.